Hey up and welcome to episode X of the Temple of Blair podcast. It's another History of Roadrunner Records episode, and in a feat of sheer arrogance on my part, I force Brian Slagel to talk to me about a label that's not Metal Blade. Obviously, Brian was starting up Metal Blade around the same time Roadrunner was making itself known across the Atlantic, and I wanted to hear his perspective on those particular days and his relationship with the label. And Brian, as you all know, is one of the most lovable men of the genre. He's incredibly accommodating, incredibly balanced with all the questions I was asking, and he is the model gentleman and the model scholar all rolled into one person. Top bloke. We even get into some in-deep conversation about the Japanese metal market, and I even get to talk about underwater hockey a little bit, so this one's a good one. Let's crack on. 1, 2, fuck shit up.
So
this is the thing, dude. You're in a very unique position to tell me all sorts of awesome goodies and the like almost a top down or an adjacent view as to how the business was run, which lowly peons like me would never get to understand. So I've got all kinds of questions which I sent your way, but I kind of want to open up with some housekeeping and pluggables and things like that. So I heard that you were going to work on a sequel to the old book. I can't remember what interview I was watching, but I think 2020 was meant to be the year for you.
Yeah, right. So worked on the book. It's a bit of a story, but my co-writer Mark Eglinton, who also did the first book, he's had a rough year. He ended up having COVID and a whole bunch of physical issues and stuff. So everything's a little bit behind. Plus, I don't know, 2020 is not a great time to put out books necessarily. So So now we're trying to figure out, do we wait and try to hold it for 2022, which is the 40th anniversary of Metal Blade, or do we want to put it out in 2021? So we'll see. But it's just more stories. It's similar to the first book, but just more stories. A lot of people wanted to hear more like obscure bands and all this sort of stuff. So
there must be a line at some point where you sort of go, you know what, guys, the rest of the story, they're for me. They're just for me now.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of stories, obviously. I try to make everything very, very vanilla and fun, which I think is the way to do it. I don't want to, upset anybody or anything like that. That's not my style necessarily. Plus, hopefully, I'm going to be in this business for a while, so you have to see everybody. So
don't want to burn.
I don't want to unleash anybody's secrets.
Yeah, that's it. Have you got a title for the next one? I'm just out of curiosity.
No, not yet. So same thing with with COVID and everything. I kind of started talking to BMG, or published the first book about it a little bit. There's a couple of working titles that I'm still not sure I like yet, but we'll figure it out at some point.
That's cool. Well, we'll keep an eye out for it, man. And congratulations on Metal Blade getting 1 million subs on YouTube.
Yeah, it's always nice for those little milestones. We've been trying to plug away on that. It was a little bit more difficult for us than some of the German metal labels, because for a very long period of time, YouTube was only available by companies that were wholly based in Germany. So we couldn't get on YouTube for a long period of time. And obviously Germany is one of the biggest markets. So once that opened up, then it kind of helps. So yeah.
I think people are climatizing as well to like the various ecosystems in the streaming realm. We're used to having everything completely on demand. So if people can put up walled gardens and sort of cater their own content within those settings, I think it creates nuance where there's oversaturation, which I think is a good thing. So hopefully 1 million subscribers, one big step towards that happening. So congrats.
Yeah, it's always nice.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Let's get down to some brass tacks then. So the Roadrunner project, for me, I'm just literally trying to write, broadcast, talk about the history of Roadrunner Records. It was a special label for me because I kind of got in about 2005 on what we would call metalcore, or at least what I would call metalcore back then. But I think now it's kind of referred to as the new wave of American heavy metal. I think that's what it kind of got referred to, like that. There's almost lines to be drawn, but let's not get into semantics, like with Trivium and Killswitch and things like that. And I was just really intrigued by, I'm sure the same thing that people are intrigued by Metal Blade for, the little logo, the little branding, that sort of mark of quality. And it just occurred to me that the story's never been told, and it's relatively unique in the sense that Cees Wessels was not a metalhead. He was just a Dutch businessman who surrounded himself with metalheads. So I'm thinking it can't hurt the conversation about metal. It can't hurt the conversation about getting metal back, having a seat at the table with other music and other media out there in understanding how Roadrunner did what it did from the origins that it came from. So that's what the project's all about. So I appreciate you spending the time to talk to me about that.
Sure.
So let's kick off with the very beginning. So 1981, Metal Blade is founded off the back of the Metal Massacre record. But did you have any experience with Roadrunner either around that time, just after that time?
So no, so I put out the first Metal Massacre album. It came out in early '82. And it was not meant to be. I wasn't trying to start a label. I wasn't trying to do anything other than help out the scene in Los Angeles at the time, because this is obviously way before the internet or any of those things. And if you weren't in Los Angeles at that point, you would have no idea that there was a bunch of metal bands playing around LA. So I was big into the new wave of British heavy metal and the kind of do-it-yourself attitude and compilations like Metal for Mothers and all these sort of things. And I kind of got the idea to do one for the LA metal bands. And I talked to the importers that I knew, because I was working at a record store at the time and I was buying from them. And I said, hey, if I do this album, will you guys distribute it? And they said, sure. So I somehow scrambled up, borrowed some money, and got enough money to make up 2,500 copies of it. And it sold out pretty quickly. And then I kind of made every single mistake humanly possible after that, in terms of licensing and all these other various things. But at some point, one of the distributors named Green World, a local LA one, said like, hey, if you want to start a label, we know you don't have any money, but if you can find us bands, we'll manufacture and distribute them for you. So I thought, oh, okay, well, I can probably do that. Why not? And that's kind of where the ball started. So I had zero experience with anything. And I think it was, well, I want to say, and I was only had distribution in the US. There was no distribution in Europe whatsoever at that point. And this is still, independent distribution in the early 80s was a very small, very tiny window of just a few different distributors. And there were some in Europe, but there wasn't a whole lot. So I think it was about 83, I'd put out, a few records. And I got a call one day from this guy named Case Wessels, who was starting Roadrunner Records. And his background was he worked at Polygram over there, which of course is now, I think it still exists, but I think Universal owns it now. But anyway, he was an executive there. He liked hard rock music. He kind of was tired of the whole corporate scene and wanted to try do something on his own. And he was looking for, partners and just product. And since I didn't have any sort of distribution in Europe, he said, hey, I said, this is Case Wessel from Roadrunner, blah, blah, blah. I'd be interested in licensing some of your records for distribution in Europe. What do you think? And I was like, oh, well, that sounds like a good idea. And then we kind of started the relationship from there.
Wow. It's interesting, the story of how he gets to metal, because the very start of Roadrunner is all eclectic, experimental, some early electronica things. Metal seems to happen when Metal Mike from Mardshock, he sends I think it's Hard and Heavy by Anvil down, and then that starts selling really well. Metallica starts selling really well, and then he goes, okay, there might be some kind of angle here. So it's interesting that he came to you after that sort of genesis, that seed had been planted, the metal seed, and he goes, okay, now I need to expand my network into the metal realm. And that's how he came in touch with you. There's a similar kind of story around Neat and around Guardian and all that genesis of new wave of British heavy metal, and to a lesser extent the New York hardcore scene. I think Connie Barrett was also kind of like one of the contacts in that world. But what was that deal like? How did you have any experience with licensing abroad at that point, or was Case the first one?
No, well, actually, I'm trying to go back and remember exactly the time frame, because we had two different deals in Europe. We did some stuff, although mostly I got really into Hellhammer. I had heard the first Hellhammer EP, which Kerrang at the time said was the worst record ever released. So I need to immediately hear this. And so I heard it, thought it was amazing. And, they were signed at that point to Noise. So I went to Noise and said, hey, obviously you guys don't have anything in the US. I'd love to do it here. Can I? And we worked out a deal there. Then we ended up doing Sodom and Destruction with them. And they did a few things for us on the reverse side. They did a Metal Massacre box set and a few other things. But it was really Roadrunner and then also Music for Nations, because they were kind of partners at the time, more or less. I mean, I don't think they were really business partners, but, Martin Hooker and Music for Nations would do stuff in the UK, and the Case and Roadrunner would do it for the rest of Europe. So I didn't really have much experience with anything. I was learning on the fly. I was, 22-year-old kid at the time.
Mm.
So, but we had a really good lawyer here in the U.S. and a couple people who were involved in the industry that kind of helped me through that. But it worked out great. And then we also licensed stuff from Roadrunner. We did like Dark Heart and Silver Mountain and a whole bunch of stuff because, you know, he had not started his label here in the US at that point because everybody's still starting out. So we did a bunch of those things for him early on as well. And it worked. I mean, the relationship worked out great because he sold a lot of records for us in Europe and we helped them out in the States as well.
Oh, cool. So I read a story in, I think it was the Slayer bio, one of the many Slayer bios, that he flew over to LA to discuss the semantics of licensing and things like that. And you ended up taking him to see Slayer.
Yeah, so he came out to LA and spent a few days, and we talked about a bunch of stuff. And then, yeah, as it happened, Slayer was playing, and I can't remember the venue, but it literally looked like somebody's house. And people were in couches, and there was maybe 20, 25 people there at the most. It was a really weird venue. And the only reason I kind of remember that show was because Case came and obviously saw the band. And even though the venue was really weird, the band was amazing. And I was like, I think this is going to be our big band. And he was like, oh, pretty interesting. And they look pretty good. Of course, you know, obviously they licensed the stuff over in Europe and it did pretty well.
Yeah. What do you think because he's an opera guy, he's not really a rock guy, but he has rock experience, but you're a metalhead through and through. So the worlds that you two are coming from, yet still propagating the same scene, is kind of baffling to me. How do you think Case vetted a band? Yeah. How do you think he did it? Because, I mean, he must have gone to that Slayer show and gone, this is noise, but I understand the vibe. Did you think that was it?
Well, I obviously, you know, he'd been in the music business for a while, and obviously Polygram had a lot of rock and you know, metal stuff at the time. So I think he's very well aware of it. But you know, what he was able to do was to just surround himself with really good people that knew the music. You know, just, I mean, obviously, you know, working with us in the early days, and then he you know, ended up hiring Monty Connor, which was interesting because he and I were both after Monty at that point. And so, you know, I remember, and I'd been friends with Monty for a long time, but Monty went with the Roadrunner thing, which made perfect sense for him because he could really run with it and do what he wanted with it, where it might have been a little bit of a different story at Metal Blade. But you know, he surrounded himself with really good people and good people that knew what they were doing. Obviously, him and Martin Hooker, Music for Nations, you know, Martin was probably more of a metal guy that Case was. So I know that those two spoke a lot about bands and what to work with. But he was really good at finding the right people to be around him that knew what they were doing. So I think even though he wasn't a massive, you know, metal guy, but I think he understood the music and understood what was good and what people he should have with him to make everything work, basically.
I have a theory, and maybe you could speak to it, maybe you can call me out on it, but when it was like the Amsterdam office only, so this is before they came to New York, so it was pre-1986, they had, as you mentioned, Dark Heart, Silver Mountain, not Melissa, Merciful Fate, King, they had all these, and Satan, yeah, they had all these great bands. My theory is, because the A&R outfit, I think, at that point was anyone who could get hold of, including Metal Mike, and a guy called Gordon Beale, a few other people. But my theory is, he was going after bands which could be painted as devil worshippers. The idea being because he knows that's marketable because of his experience, not necessarily because he knows the metal. And that's why we ended up with a band called Satan. And that's why we ended up with Merciful Fate and a few other bits and bobs like that. Do you think, was the Satanic Panic, like, was it really a potent cultural force back in those days where that might have been a viable marketing strategy? Or am I just getting a bit ahead of myself?
It's an interesting concept, but I think it was more just the bands of that time. That's where everything kind of went. If you look at all those bands, and obviously he did Metallica and Anthrax and other bands that weren't, you know, blatantly satanic as much as Slayer or Merciful Fate or Satan, which was another band that we put out for him in the US. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think that there is, and this is, you know, my perspective as well, there is a form of anti-establishment, you know, pushing the envelope, that sort of stuff. And I grew up in the 70s with, you know, Alice Cooper and Kiss were the most horrible people on earth, and I loved what they were doing. So there's a little bit of that, you know, kind of shocking people, all that sort of stuff. So I think he liked that part of it, and it was pretty easy because there were so many bands around that time that were doing it anyway. But I don't know. I mean, if there was a concerted effort for him, he never told it to me. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. To me, like, his history, there's an anecdote from like 1965 with a band called Kubi and the Blizzards, which is a Dutch like acid rock outfit. And as part of a promotional campaign for them, oh no, sorry, this is 69. He gets all these local farmers in this tiny Dutch village, gets all the farmers into a barn, and he puts on a massive piss up. He gets loads of beer and a load of strippers in, and he takes a load of pictures. The idea being this will be the cover of the album. And this is all Case is doing. And then the next day, it's like a local scandal. These are all the old boys. These are all farmers who have got like their wives are at home with rolling pins, smacking and ready to go. And it was like caused like a local scandal. And that again sort of drove. In fact, it's still talked about today. That particular single called Apple Knockers Flophouse and that event. So I think there is something to say, maybe not satanic stuff, but there is something to say about, well, look, how can we cause a ruckus with this band? And I think he definitely did it with Merciful Fate being on the Filthy 15. I definitely did it with Carnivore, with Jesus, Hitler, and Pete being Pete. But yeah, I guess it makes sense to me, certainly. But as I say, I imagine he wouldn't have expressed it so directly.
No, but I do know that one of the reasons why he left the major label was because he wanted more freedom to do what he wanted to do, and kind of wanted to go against things that were, because especially major labels in the 80s, you're trying to do anything controversial and they don't want to hear much about that. So for him, it obviously gave him a lot more freedom to do whatever he wanted. And he, founded into this whole, new heavy metal scene that nobody was really picking up on at the time. And obviously he went in full bore.
I can give you some context here, just because I've been like putting together this chapter 1, I've been editing it now. I've been going down the rabbit holes. So just before he started Roadrunner, his engagement was RCA Netherlands. So he was the head of that. Before that, it was Phonogram and Polygram. He was like the head of International A&R, which got him around with, Christ, what's the band that did, it's the Bachman Turner Overdrive, the Ain't Seen Nothing Yet song. He went around the world with them, did all sorts. But his last engagement, after the RCA Netherlands thing fell over, because they ended up merging all the offices into like a Benelux office instead of like a independent Belgium and Netherlands one. He was at Phonogram representing Pickwick, which is an English label. So I guess if we think about it as a narrative, I'm not asking you to speak for him. I'm just trying to fill in the narrative and connect the dots. He's had a really prolific career up to this point, and now he's kind of babysitting. So it doesn't surprise me at all. And Jan van der Linden was his business partner at the time for Roadrunner. He's whispering in his ear saying, look, I've got an import-export company over by the coast, and we can tell you that all these metal albums are selling loads. So it speaks to, what you said there speaks to what I was researching, that he must have just gone, well, this is a pretty sound opportunity to explore different avenues and have a bit more independence, I guess.
Yeah, 100%. I knew he wasn't happy there because, that was kind of my first, when we first started talking, it's like, what motivated you to do this? And, and he kind of, gave his background, a lot of which you mentioned. And I know he wasn't happy there and wanted to do something independent. And that was kind of, there was this whole, kind of independent label surge that was happening back then. Obviously in the US there was us and Megaforce, and then later Combat and all this sort of stuff. And then in Europe you had obviously Music for Nations in the UK, and then Roadrunner in Europe. So there's this whole little networking group of labels that were doing metal stuff at the time that were, kind of doing something fun and interesting.
Yeah. Did he ever tell you why he named it Roadrunner? This is like a blind spot for me.
Here's the problem. Yes, he did, and I can't remember what it was. It's one of those things where I'm like, because I asked him that, and he had a pretty good reason, but they had a lot of trouble with that, obviously, because Warner Brothers owns the rights to that, and
yes,
it became at one point when the label kind of became pretty big. They had, I think that's when they did the Road Racer thing, because for a while I think they were not allowed to use Roadrunner for a bit, but they obviously somehow figured it out. But yeah, I can't, like I said, he told me, and I vaguely remember it, but I can't tell you exactly. It's got to be on Google or something somewhere.
I've got two theories from my research. Jan van der Linden, he only gave me a few emails. He didn't want to do an interview, which is completely fine, but he said it was just named after the character, and I was like,
yeah,
that feels It doesn't feel like that's what Case was going for. If he was especially if it was formed in the actual company was formed in 78, he must have known there would be an IP problem. Anyway, two theories. One, Kubi and the Blizzards again. So they as a band, if you read up anything on them, they quite quickly get compared to a British invasion band called the Pretty Things. The Pretty Things have their fourth single, but the first track on their first album is called Roadrunner, which is a Bo Diddley cover, which I think, all right, fair enough. It's revered as one of the first like proto metal songs in the same sort of vein as the Yardbirds and Helter Skelter. So it's in that crowd. And I was like, well, that's a bit of a stretch. And then I saw the single and it's all red. It's like that Roadrunner red. And I was like, well, that's one thing. Signed to Fontana Records, eventually bought by Phonogram. So I can imagine the words Roadrunner came across his desk at one point. That's one theory. Theory number two. Roadrunner is slang for someone who chases money. Usually it's like a drug runner or someone who just does the odd job or something like that. Now, Roadrunner as a company was called Roadrunner Productions before it was a record label, and it was formed in 1978. So I'm thinking this is when he's working at RCA Netherlands. So he's doing business on the side. So maybe it's an in-joke for himself where he's thinking, I'm kind of hustling here. Let's call this company a hustling company.
Yeah, I tend to go more with your first theory than your second theory, I think, because like I said, he did explain it, and it had something to do with music and the character and stuff. But so that knowing him, that makes way more sense than theory number two. That's just my thoughts.
Good. Perfect. But it's so close yet so far. If he told you, but you can't quite remember.
I know, right? It's like Howard Stern had Joni Mitchell on, and she told him who You're So Vain was about, and he can't remember who it was. So same thing.
Stephen Fry knows why Douglas Adams designated the number 42 for being the meaning of life. Actually, no, he's sworn to secrecy on that one. He's going to take that one to his grave, so it's not quite the same, I guess. One thing which King mentions, King Diamond, yourself in Case, while I observed earlier that you're coming from totally different backgrounds, you're very communicative and very sort of open and constructive when it comes to developing the artist, which is obviously a key factor when you're trying to build a brand and build a label. Do you think that's a key reason why he did so well with Merciful Fate and why he's got the same kind of legacy that Metal Blade has? Like, it's a very strong, independent powerhouse, obviously until 2012. But
yeah, 100%.
Key factor in building that legacy.
Yeah. I mean, you have to be a successful label at really any level, but certainly as an independent label. Yeah, you have to have a relationship with the artist, because that's, especially as an independent, that's the only way you're going to keep them around. If they don't have a good relationship with you, there's all sorts of other avenues to go for, and just developing stuff. And you want to make it, and we both have the same sort of thought process on this, is you want to make it a nice home for them. You want them to feel like it's a family, and it's a comfortable place to be, and have a good relationship with the artist and be friendly with them as well, and not have that adversarial thing. And Case was really, really good with that. I just know my experience with him as a very young guy starting out a label. He was extremely helpful, and just the business things and practices, and if I had questions on things, he could help me with that. Oh, sorry, I don't know if you heard that gigantic noise. Okay. But anyway, he was really good about helping me kind of run through the business, and he obviously is way more experienced than I was, but a very kind, gentle guy when it came to that, and we've always from day one until now, we've always had a really good and very friendly relationship, which is great.
It's interesting because, like, from a fan perspective, the lens you look through is fan to band to label, and when you go through those when you hit those landmarks, more likely than not, you're going to get some people on the way who weren't too happy with the way they were treated or something like that. But the more I research into it, the more I empathize with the label as like an institution, because the job is to perpetuate and propagate metal and make metal happen. And Case as a business guy, it's brutal, but at the same time, he knows where he needs to invest, and he knows where he needs to sink in the hours and the cost and things like that. Did he ever was there any pearls of wisdom that he gave you, which you bring forward to this day, or is it just like general conversational?
I really was, for a lot from me was just running a company and being a younger guy, because there's the whole business side of stuff. There's, when you're dealing with, being a record label, I was just a fan. I had no background. I took some business courses in college, but I never intended to run a company. And it's a whole thing when you're running that it's a lot different than anything else. So as far as the behind the scenes business sort of stuff, he was a really big help in that. If I had questions about things, he would definitely help. And certainly, just getting us up and running and being successful in Europe. I mean, we probably stayed with them a lot longer than we probably should have before we actually did our own thing over there. But it was always a very comfortable, friendly relationship. The bands, when they went to Europe, felt good about what was going on. It was really toward the end, we just had so much catalog, and it just kind of made sense for us to finally leave. And we might have should have done that, 5 years prior to that. But it was just a great place to be. And Roadrunner, up till that point, this is like mid 1990s, was a really great, independent, friendly, good company. And obviously, Kay's running it was his company.
I guess as well, though, you're an asset to Roadrunner because you're giving, when he's relying on third-party IP across the sea and you're churning it out and delivering the goods, then he's just like, no, keep Brian happy. So why wouldn't
of course. But he was, when we finally did our own thing, he was fine. It was like, yeah, it's time for you guys to do it. And they were kind of evolving more into a record company that were signing a lot of bands and doing less licensing stuff. So it kind of was the right time, I think, for both of us to make that move.
You say mid 90s, was it?
Yeah, I think we started in 1995 in Europe. So.
Right. Okay. Just for my reading. One thing which, when I was reading your book, which I found quite common with yourself and Roder, was when you're acquiring acts, it was difficult to compete with anything bigger. Their deals were typically, Roadrunner keeps all the IP, it's a 5 or 6 album deal, and they can usually give a $5,000 advance, left or right of that, depending on how Case felt about it. Because something like Jaguar got, they were tried and tested really with Power Games, so I think they got about 10 grand. I imagine Merciful Fate got a bit more, but I don't know. But if, say, an A&R guy was like, you got to sign this band, this is the thing, and Case wasn't feeling it, he'd maybe throw $3,000 at it. Did you ever find yourself in a bidding war with them at any point?
No, never. In fact, we made a pact very early on, maybe a year or two into our relationship, that we would never go after the same band and we would never get into a bidding war. If somebody found the band first, then that's fine, go for it. But we didn't want to get into a bidding war with each other because we were, number one, both very friendly with each other, and we're also business partners for a long period of time. But even after that ended, all the way through, we never, ever got into a bidding war with any band on Roadrunner, and vice versa. Like if we found them first and Roadrunner came in second, they go, oh, Metal Blade, okay, fine, good, go with them.
That's
the same,
awesome.
Same for us, and that's the integrity there. I thought was really fantastic because, even towards the latter parts of Roadrunner, like in the 2000s, when there might have been some times where, there were some bands that we easily could have gotten into a fight over. Never happened. Never ever happened.
That's incredible. That's really cool. Although you say you were going after Monty around the same time, so not quite.
Well, yeah, that might have been before, but that wasn't a band, I guess, right?
Exactly. No, that's right. Were your deals somewhat similar then? Was it kind of like the? Were you privy to taking all the IP and publishing? No,
we did it. We did it a lot different. I was never even before 360 deals happened. I was like, we take the publishing and some stuff, but it wasn't a big thing for us. I want what's best for the band, and we always felt like, our deal is, we're the record company, and that's our job is to do that. We're not a publishing company. We're not a merchandising company. We're not a booking agency. We're none of that. And we kind of kept that way going for a long period of time. Whereas, Roadrunner kind of morphed into, they had the publishing entity, and then they had a merchandise entity. So they, and Case wanted to build a huge company. And I was not necessarily into that, because we got to a point in the early 90s when we were at Warner Brothers where it kind of started becoming a big company and we're doing a lot of stuff. And I just felt a little uncomfortable with that because we had a lot of employees, and it just didn't have the same feel for my end. So So we never went down that route. But I understand why Case did it. I mean, it makes sense. And if you can do it right, like if you have a good publishing company and have a good merchandising company where they're all kind of, working together, then it makes sense. And I think at one point when Roadrunner is at their highest, they're doing all of that pretty well. In fact, we had bands that had publishing deals or merch deals with Roadrunner outside of the record deal they have with us.
You might be able to help me with one thing, because I'm struggling to distinguish between IP and publishing, because I would have thought they're all one and the same. If you have the IP, you have the right to therefore publish it in whatever fashion you want.
No, the way it works in the music business is the labels can own the record if they deem that's what they want. Of course, things are changing drastically now, but back in the day, that's because the advances were much higher. We were pretty much the only avenue for income for the bands. So we would actually own the records, but the publishing part of it, the people who write the songs are the ones who do the publishing. And then you have a publisher that collects the money and pays it to you. Some labels will take some of the publishing for themselves because they feel, hey, if I'm giving you this massive amount of deal, I need to be able to recoup that expense somehow. So you would get the publishing involved. But then, Roadrunner started their own publishing company, which, again, kind of makes sense. And, it's, you can go in and sign a deal with Roadrunner and have all these different options you can do. And, I don't know that I think towards the end, there was more pressure from them maybe to do publishing deals within the company than there were before, but we did it a lot differently than that.
Right. Okay. So in terms of like the publishing revenue, it would typically be the heavy lifting of getting the product out there, not necessarily distribution, but from let me try and articulate this. So
well, basically, if let's say you're going to sign a band to a pretty hefty advance contract, and this was happening quite a lot in the 80s and 90s, where it's again because the other forms of income weren't that much, and this is the way the music business was. So if you're giving a band a huge advance, you want to be able to recoup that money from somewhere, and sometimes it's not only record sales. You might need to add in some extra money from the publishing side. But the publishing side technically is a whole separate entity. Like we as a record company have to pay the publishing. So in Europe, because we're a German company, we had to pay the German people for all the records we manufactured, and they would then pay to the publisher, who would then get whatever share it was to the writers. And it was similar in the US. I mean, a little bit different scenario in the US because we're screwed up over here when that comes to that.
I feel when you contextualize it in different territories, it makes a lot of sense. It is kind of like the labor involved in getting the product out there, short of actually putting it in the vans and taking it to the shops. Got you.
Yeah, and there's a lot of work and marketing and promotion and all these sort of things. Like I said, it's a lot different than and you had to manufacture albums. I mean, that's the really crazy thing about the music business prior to where we are now, is that we were basically a consignment business for all that time. You could make 100,000 records and ship them all out to the stores. If nobody bought them, all the stores could ship them back and get their full amount of money they paid for these records back. So it was a really risky business back in the day. I would tell some of my friends who were in other businesses how it worked, and they'd be like, "What? That's how it works there?" I go, "That's how it works." So it's a lot riskier then. So I understand trying to get pieces of the other stuff. But like I said, we didn't really do a lot of that. And then when the business kind of fell apart and people were doing these 360 deals, I was always against that, because like we can't, like we don't do all those things. It's not fair for us to take every penny from the band. It's just not. It's not the way it works. I want the bands to be successful. I want us to be successful and the bands to be successful. And you don't want to have a band that's unhappy because, hey, I signed a 360 deal with you. I'm paying for giving you money while I'm on the road, and you aren't doing anything to help with that. So there you go.
I'd love to ask like what the perspective on that is these days with people signing masters over and things like that. But I think we could go down a rabbit hole there. It might take too long. So you mentioned there's about it being a consignment business, and if the records were returned from the shops, tough tits, not much you can do about it. That's where our friend Alan Becker comes in, right? So he's the one that's going to say, this Brugera record, the one with the severed head, that's not going to sell at Best Buy as much as you think. Instead of creating 40,000, maybe go 10. And that's his world, isn't it?
Sure. And that's what you do. You go to your distributor and your salespeople and say, we have this album. What do you think we should ship? And then we have our numbers that we want to ship, and then they have their numbers, and hopefully we're somewhat on the same page, and you go from there. So that's the way it used to work. So quite a bit different.
Which brings us to when Roadrunner started stamping their claim into New York, right? So they were using the same distributor as you at that point. Were you with Alan at that point, 87?
Yeah, we were. Yeah, we've been with, aside from the early days, we've been with, Relativity, what Red, now the Orchard. We've been with them forever. And yeah, Roadrunner was with them for a large portion until they finally went through Warner's.
It's interesting, 1986 though, because that's the year you outpaced Roadrunner in terms of output. Like, I think I might even have the numbers because I was really tedious and I might have actually gone through Discogs and picked them all.
Yeah, we put a lot of records there.
Yeah, man. So up until that point, Roadrunner was absolutely swamping everyone. 1981, 22 records, 82, 33, 83, 64 records. And it goes up and up and up because obviously they're licensing en masse and Case knows how to play that game. In the meantime, you went from, in 1983, 16 records, 72, 1980 to 72 in 84, 1985, 75. And in 1986, you do 103. And it's great because I've got it all on like graphs and I'm trying to articulate like, this is where the scene was, these tiny little nuggets like Metal Blade and Roadrunner who were just trying to push the scene as much as they could. And the entire output of the entire industry was about maybe 100 records for quite a while. And then all of a sudden, as you hit 1986, everyone's coming in. SPV's kicked in, Mausoleum's kicked in. Everyone's completely pumping out records, and it's officially a scene. Heavy Metal Parking Lot, it's all kicked off. So for you, were you sat in your chair now going, "Oh shit! If Roadrunner's making building an office or moving into the US, I might lose 1% of my market share. I've got some competition here, even though you had a great relationship with them." Or did you think?
No, I never really looked at it that way, and I still don't. I'm first and foremost a fan of the music. So the more people involved and the more bands that get an opportunity, I think that's good for the scene. And the more of us that are out there creating stuff, then the scene is going to be better. Especially in the, we came to the mid '80s where all of a sudden the state is exploding. You mentioned all these records that are being put out. We were all still fans is growing into becoming, business people and labels and all this sort of stuff. But, that was still back in the days where our motto was heavy metal will never die, because people still were saying, especially at that point, oh, it's a fad, it's going to go away, nobody's going to care in 5 years. So for me, the more labels involved and the more good bands being signed and the more records coming out, the better it was for the overall health of the scene. So and look, we were a little label at the time, so we clearly can't do everything. So the more there's a Megaforce or a Roadrunner or Combat or all these labels involved, I just felt it was better for the scene.
Which is so cool because it's a drastic change from 5 years before. And I think for you personally, obviously I don't know you personally, but if Metal Blade did go under, it's for you, it would have been like, well, I'm still a metalhead. I'm still going to go to shows, even if I'm doing my paper round at 3 a.m. It's
yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, man. Was there any, this is kind of a specific question, which I might already kind of know the answer to, because it looks like you guys have like a really great relationship anyway, across different brands and what we might perceive as competitors, but everyone was with IRD at the time. Everyone was with Alan. Did that ever stir up any conflict of interest, or did anyone ever think, should we be diversifying here?
There were times, because we're all kind of fighting for their attention at times.
Yeah.
So there were certainly times when, we wanted a record to do better than it did, and we felt, well, maybe it didn't do so well because they were putting out 5 huge records at the same time from other labels. So there was a bit of that, but I think that to their credit, they did a pretty good job of trying to pay attention to everybody and not let those things fall through the cracks. But there's always times, and I'm sure it was the same way with the other labels. We're like, hey, you're spending too much time on that Metal Blade record, spend more time on us, and vice versa. I mean, you're fighting for the same space sometimes. But I think the reason we all stayed with them for quite a long period of time, and we're still there, is because they've always looked out for us and tried to do their best. And for the most part, it's not 100% obviously, but for the most part, it's pretty good.
Yeah. I did ask Alan that as well, and he was like, the problem that we had was people perceived it as a conflict of interest. Absolutely, from the day to day, it wasn't. There was no way was anyone taking more priority. Even Combat, which was the in-house label, they never took priority over any other label, but it was quite easily perceived as such, and that's what had potentially tainted some of those business meetings, even if everything works out in the end.
Sure, but I also looked at it like the more metal they have, the stronger they are in the market, and this was still an emerging scene, an emerging style of music. So the more they had, the more power they had to get into the stores, because hey, if you don't bring in this, then you're not going to get this, and here's like your one-stop shopping. Just call us once a month, and you got all the metal. So it did kind of help out that way as well, I think.
Yeah, yeah. How close were you to the New York office? Because that's when the personnel do explode. That's when maybe it stops being Case on the phone. It starts being Monty, Doug, Regina Joskow, maybe Kathy Reed, a load of people who are still there these days who I'm going to try and contact, but probably won't speak to me. Did you have a relationship there as well? Once, and obviously our friend Steve Ricardo, who was,
of course,
when they opened the doors with Holly Lane.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we would all go to the same metal shows. We'd all, especially in New York. I mean, we had an office in New York for a long period of time, and I spent a lot of time in New York, so I knew all of them. I knew Monty, and Kathy worked for us, and I know a lot of those people even beforehand. But yeah, I've known all those people forever. We always see each other at shows, and again, we're all in this. I always find it interesting that people go like, "Oh, you're competing with them, they're your competitors." It's like, well, I mean, yes and no. I mean, technically they are, but we're also all in the same scene. We're all trying to do our best to make the scene get bigger and bigger. So it never really felt super competitive. I mean, there's always, times here and there, but for the most part, we're all just in. So I know all those people, really well. I would always, if I'm in New York for a couple of weeks, I'd always go over to Roadrunner office for an afternoon and just hang out and talk to everybody. And, it's all good.
That's good. I think this is the thing when you're trying to do something fringe, which metal is always a fringe thing. And if it's not a fringe thing, it's always the losing party in the battle. And I think if you're fighting that side, there isn't such thing as like commercial competitiveness in the same way that it would be in any other cutthroat industry. So it's always nice to hear.
Yeah, it was, it's all pretty, I mean, with all the labels, we're all pretty friendly. And, I mean, obviously there are times where you're competing and all that sort of stuff for bands. But, once a band signs somewhere, it's like, all right, cool. But we all want them to do well.
Yeah. Yeah. Steve Ricardo is actually, he catered a message for you, which I'm going to read out because I can't remember what it was. It was short but lovely. Bear with me a second. I'll just open up the message. Send him my best and mention to him that I said he was the best boss I had in my entire music career. Great guy and the godfather of American indie metal.
So very nice. I appreciate that. He's a good guy. So
yeah, he's a good egg, man. When I interviewed him, my face was like hurting because I was just grinning so much.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, yeah, man. Jim Salaby as well.
Oh, awesome. Jim's great.
Yes, yeah. Sends his regards. So as we move sort of into the 90s, into sort of the death of well, I'm going to say that I don't call it the death of metal. It's one that's sort of regarded as the death.
Almost death of metal.
Yeah, I mean, the doors were still open and people were still going to get. I don't know. I was alive in '89. I couldn't possibly perceive it. It's the decade Iron Maiden started putting music in video games. That's my metal milestone. Roadrunner do like a massive expansion. They try and move into alt, like metal and alternative rock, and it's interesting because they do it before the Black Album, they do it before Nevermind and things like that. How did you perceive that from an industry perspective, going, okay, this is Case enacting his master plan of becoming like a massive indie. He's trying to move out, he's trying to really penetrate these other markets. Did you ever sort of get that vibe, or would you just like,
I mean, Case's perspective on things were a lot different than mine. I mean, I just want to stay true to what we were doing. But Case always wanted to build a huge, gigantic, label. He envisioned that, I think, from day one. So it just made sense for him when other things started happening to go in those directions. Just a lot different for me. I just wanted to kind of stay true to what we did, and I felt that if we did do that, that hopefully on the other end, that'll help us down the road, which it did. But I don't think it also didn't really hurt Roadrunner either. It's just, they had a different perspective on stuff. So
yeah. When I think it's 2001 hits, and they do the deal with Universal. Were you observing in the same capacity? Were you thinking, all right, so we were kind of like in almost a scene of people trying to propagate metal and make the metal happen. Then Universal buying, I think it was 49% of Roadrunner. Did you think, Are we gonna have our relationship compromised in any way as the bidding war arrangement? Let's give it a name, man. Let's give it like the let's give it the Atlantic Pact. The Atlantic Pact.
There you go.
Do you think that might have been broken? Was there any worries on that front?
It's always possible. I mean, things do change. I mean, look, we spent 4 years at Warner Brothers. I mean, they didn't own us, but we spent 4 years there. And, being involved with a major label is certainly a lot different than being an independent label. But I think at that point for Roadrunner, they were starting to sign bands that had a pretty wide commercial accessibility, I guess. And for them to be independent, especially still at that time, if you're an independent label, trying to push something in the top 10 or 20 in Billboard, or get radio play was pretty much impossible. And again, I know Case wanted to expand it and be as big as he can. So I think that deal at the time for where Roadrunner is up, it made sense. It was a lot of the same people, so I didn't really feel that things on our run were going to change. Plus, they were after a whole different style of bands than we were. We were still pretty staunchly metal, and they clearly did their own share of metal. But they were signing a lot of different stuff that we had, we would never sign.
Right. Yeah. Fair enough. One thing I noticed was Metal Blade had a Japan office, as did Roadrunner. I think the Roadrunner one closed as well, and I think the Metal Blade one closed as well. What is the thing with that market? Why is it so hard? Is it?
It's really the weirdest thing ever. It's been like this forever. It's like everywhere else in the world, you kind of think things all more or less make sense. Like, if somebody's big in the States, they'll usually be big in Europe or Australia or all these other places. But Japan is this whole completely different market. You had bands who you would think you swore would be huge in Japan that never were. And then bands who are humongous in Japan that nobody else really cares about. But it's a fascinating place. And for both us and Roadrunner, we had we were doing a lot of business there, so it kind of made sense to have boots on the ground, so to speak. So we both did that for a while, and it, for a long period of time, it was really successful. But really, what changed was really interesting. So up until I forget when it was, but maybe mid 2000s, something like that. So the way the Japanese market worked was that 75% of all the music being sold, especially hard rock and metal, were from export artists, and maybe 20% were from Japanese artists. And this was the same in a lot of different genres. And I guess the government at the time felt like, hey, why are we making money for all these other people and we're not making money for our own artists? So they started a lot of things like what Canada does with Canadian content, where 30% of all your radio has to be domestic artists and stuff. And Japan really went that. So really in a very short period of time, maybe 2 or 3 years, it really completely flipped, where all of a sudden it's like 75% of people buying and consuming music at that point were from domestic Japanese artists, and only 25% were imports. So you basically just fell off a cliff. So at some point it just didn't make any sense for us to really be there, because we just weren't selling nearly as we probably selling a third of the records we were selling a few years ago. But it's always interesting over there, and it's really weird now, because you would have thought, at least I would have thought, that streaming stuff would be huge there, but it's just not.
Really?
No.
That's
probably
amazing.
One of the smaller places in the world. One of my friends in Japan once told me that part of the thing is that I guess all the the younger people, the consumers, the people buying consuming music, they buy these cell phones, and they get a new one like every few months, and they have very little storage on there. They don't care. They don't want to store the music, and it's just a weird thing there. So again, I love it there. I love Japan. It's an amazing place to be. But the music business there is just so crazy and strange.
It's interesting because I think out east, a lot of the time, the value systems are so different. I mean, for Japan, as you say, it's phones. I think some place in China, it's watches. Philippines, it's something else. It's all these different things. But one thing Richard Bengloff was talking to me about was like the propagation of the different priced customer. There's like tiered customers. There's a $15 customer, so that's me buying a Merciful Fate album. There's a $30 customer, which is me buying a Merciful Fate album and going to a gig. And then there's the $150, which is the collector's items. And that was kind of how it was tiered, and that was it. Now with streaming, and now with the onset of more let's say more creative, tangible box sets, things like that. It's kind of moved from 15, 30 to 150. It's now like 15, 60, 200 and think I feel, is that, am I full of shit? But
No, it's completely accurate. Yeah, what we're finding is that you've got your, your I guess what I call passive fans who, they'll stream everything and they'll listen to it. Maybe they'll buy a CD or an album here and there. But you've got your Uber fans, whatever, a lot of the stuff, D2C, which is direct to consumer sales. Every major record we have, we put out these different packages where, you can buy the CD, you can buy the CD and a shirt, you can buy the CD, a shirt and a vinyl, you can buy the CD, shirt and a gigantic, replica of a boat or whatever it is that we do. And yeah, you find that there's, there's the small people, but then there's these hardcore people that will, buy anywhere from, like you said, 15 to, 250 or beyond that. So yeah, it's definitely like that. And you've got, and we obviously love all of them because they're keeping us all going here, is, the people who buy these big packages. It's becoming more and more. We're finding that we can't, like, for example, we launched a new Cannibal Corpse album, I think yesterday. We already sold out of like most of the physical product in like a day. So we're having to scramble to make more. So yeah, it's good. And but the thing I love about that is because that's me. Like back in the day, it was me. I would buy anything and everything I could off of band. Whether it was a bootleg or as many shirts. I'll buy as many things as I could. Iron Maiden's my favorite band. So if they put out 1,000 CD reissues, I'll buy them all and everything else. So I like that because that's the hungry, crazy consumer that just wants anything and everything they can from a band. And it's cool to see so many of them out there now that makes me feel good because that's kind of where I was.
There's so many things I want to pick up on that not necessarily related to Roadrunner, but there's a Japanese angle, but there's something you touched on there. Are you going to watch the Power Slave listen through on Friday?
I don't know. My schedule, all of a sudden it's gotten super crazy. So I don't know. I may or may not.
Yeah. Well, it's when I put my kids to bed. So I'm like, I'll have to just wait and see if I can make it. But you're totally right. Like when I was speaking to Jim Saleh, because I'm a recent-ish dad and I'm a recent-ish homeowner. So my records are now in the loft and my hunt for all the Vertigo pressings of the Black Sabbath records has gone on hold. So when I spoke to Jim Saleh and he was boasting about his Ace of Spades 40th anniversary box set, and I was showing him the Jägermeister Slayer end of career edition Jägermeister bottle, I immediately, it got me ticking again. I was like, I can't fit anything anywhere. Yeah, I still almost bought an Evil pre-release vinyl set for their new album that's coming out. So it's my angle with this was the at least illusion or perception of like the premium product. That in my head is where I'm assuming Japan is. So I would have thought this kind of market would have been
and part of the problem there is exactly what you just said. I have the same problem. Like, luckily I moved to Nevada where things are a lot cheaper. So I literally have an entire house that fills all of my music collection. Right. But in Japan, these people are living in tiny little places. They can't afford, there's no room to put a music collection anywhere in Japan, unless you're lucky enough to, living in, some place that you actually have a big house. But everything there is so small. So it's another reason why you just don't see the amount of collecting and the amount of big stuff because they don't have anywhere to put it.
You know what, man? I had a friend who went to Japan a few months ago, and it can't have been a few months ago, before the pandemic. And what he was doing was he was in Tokyo and he was going through different, particularly, I think they were called record bars, and it's literally a bar which has the space for records. So it was literally a bar, and instead of bottles of whiskey behind the bar, it was just records and records and records. So maybe that's their outlet for that thing.
Yeah. Whatever works, right?
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to bring us sort of into the station a little bit. So I've got one kind of, it's almost a loaded question. It's kind of a soundbite question, but I'm curious as to your perspective. Obviously, Metal Blade and Roadrunner, they existed along the heyday of like the big independent labels. You're still going through that. They sort of called it out in 2012. Why do you think both you guys and both you as a brand have the legacy you do? What's the trick?
You're just lucky enough to work with good bands. I mean, that's really all it is. I mean, we're lucky enough that, the bands we work with people like, and I mean, that's really, but I think that the core of it, is all of these labels, 90% of the people that work there are just all music fans, metal fans, and I think that the fans know that, they realize like, hey, these guys are just like us. They're putting out good quality stuff, and they're into it like we are. And, I mean, if we started putting out terrible bands in a year, we probably wouldn't be around anymore. So it really comes down to, as long as you have good artists, you're gonna be all right.
The business is taking that cathartic feeling you got when you first saw fucking Metallica or Anthrax, taking that feeling of catharsis, reverse engineering it, and going, how can we make people feel like that when they go and see Killswitch, when they go and see Satan, even if it has been 40 years or whatever. I feel that's the business, and that's the labor, as in the operative word being the labor of the love. And because everyone's on the same page with that, it kind of makes the objective loud and clear. It's propagate metal, make metal happen, and don't go under, for fuck's sake, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, that's about it. I mean, there's no real, I mean, obviously there's a business plan, and you have to do it the right way, but it all pertains to the artists. And if you have good artists, you'll stick around, hopefully.
Yeah, man. So let's close out with 2012, right? So the Red Wedding happens, as it's tentatively sort of known as. You stood outside Lafayette Street. I don't know if the office was there at that point, with a butterfly net, trying to get Mark Palmer, trying to get Monty. How did you feel when the initial news was announced that a lot of the worldwide offices were going to close? And I imagine your phone was ringing off the hook.
Yeah, it's sad. I mean, I actually was talking to Al Becker about this the other day. It's just because I know so many people that have sold their labels, and every one of them that has done that was probably the biggest regret they ever did. So it's sad, for me, it's just one less label that's out there putting out quality metal stuff. So it was a bummer. I mean, this is, and I know Case wasn't super happy about it, but that's kind of I guess the beds you make when you get involved with the major labels, is that's always a possibility they're going to come in and do that. And I understand why they do it. But it's just, it's a bummer. And then you have friends that are out of business and out of work, and it was very sad.
I'll edit this out, but did you have a hit list? Did you think, all right, Monty's now available, let's see if I can get him, Mark Palmer's available?
No, it was weird because we didn't, we pretty well staffed at that point, so we didn't really have any particular openings for anybody. I mean, I know we talked to some people about doing some things, and we've had a couple people here and there that used to be at Roadrunner or CM that are with us now, but not really. I mean, you don't want to have that. I know it sounds like you're picking through whatever, but not really. We didn't really do that. We had a couple conversations, but it was a weird timing for us because we were really, at that point, pretty much comfortable with everything we had. But with the interesting thing is that over the years, especially in Europe, is a lot of those Roadrunner people ended up doing their own like marketing companies. We've hired them on numerous times for a lot of our big bands over there. So in that case, it kind of worked out all right in the end over there for us.
I might keep that in then, because that's quite an interesting point you raised there, even though I got to it in a rather contentious way, which I apologize for, because it's a bit of a weird question.
Worries.
Yeah, cool. Where was I going to go with that? I had a good angle. I'd love to know what King's perspective is, because he obviously did Merciful Fate and King Diamond, and then he came to you in the early 90s, which is it's interesting times, because we have that before it all kicks off in 1986. As I'm saying, it's that year, and then it's the in sort of the lesser sort of like more docile times in the 90s. So I'd really like to see what his perspective would have been, but maybe that's one for another day. I know in the book he stresses again about how it was all about communication, and that was the common theme between Roadrunner and Metal Blade. It was just all about being constructive and open and nice to people, which is always a really nice message. But that's it. That's all I've got for Roadrunner, unless you've got any anecdotes or stories that maybe have flitted across your mind. You haven't remembered why you called it Roadrunner, have you?
Well, no, sorry. I will tell you one kind of funny story. This will give you a little bit of insight into Case's sense of humor, which was very European, I guess I should say. So the first time I went to Amsterdam, we had obviously been working with them for a while, and I think it was only the second time I'd been to Europe at that point. I can't remember. Must have been 84, maybe something like that.
That's when they did the office. Yeah.
Somewhere around there. Yeah. So anyway, I figured, I want to go over and meet a lot of the people we work with over there. So I go to Amsterdam, first time I've ever been to Amsterdam. And Case, said, let's go out to dinner. I'm all right. So Case, myself, and one of the other business partners they had there, I think it was just three of us, and he said, have you ever had Indian food before? And again, I'm like 23 at the time. So I think I might have had Indian food once, but I'm like, whatever. I'm up for whatever you want. So we go to this Indian restaurant. He orders everything. So I don't know what any of this stuff is. And it comes in all these little boxes. There's just little boxes of little things in there. You're just supposed to try a little bit of each thing. So, okay. So I try a few things. And all of a sudden I start to sweat. Like, these are like the hottest things I've ever eaten in my entire life. I almost thought I was gonna like throw up. I was like, I could barely breathe. And they're laughing hysterically at me struggling to stay alive because they've given me this hot stuff. They finally brought me a thing of milk, and that haunted me on Indian food for a very long time. I couldn't go back for quite a while, but they had a great time. They laughed hysterically at me struggling with this stuff. So let's torture the American. Give him some crazy food. So there you go.
There's one where Case said to Alan and his guys, look, we're trying to push this band called Typo Negative, and if we get it gold, we're going to fly all you guys out for a weekend in Amsterdam. And that's a story that's yet to be told by one of Alan's colleagues, but I'm looking forward to similar kind of
you can only imagine.
Yeah, man. Yeah. Well, thanks very much for your time, man. What were we going to say? Is there anything else I should have plugged on your behalf at the start? I was on about the book, but maybe there's something else coming up you wanted to mention.
No, you're all good. It's all fine. People know where to look for our stuff.
Did you check out Underwater Hockey?
Yes. So that's crazy, man. So clearly they're like they're not breathing while they're down there. They got to go up to catch breath. So that's a weird. It almost looked to me like fish, like when it gets all crazy and there's almost like watching some sort of fish fight or something. But that's a pretty fascinating sport. There's all these crazy hockey-related sports. A few years ago, Johan from Amon Amarth told me about a sport called bandy, which is mostly in Eastern Europe and Scandinavia, where it's basically ice hockey on a soccer-sized, soccer-sized thing. It's soccer rules basically, except they have the sticks. They have a gigantic net, and it's the same rules as soccer, but it's all on this sheet of ice that's the size of a soccer.
Jeez,
field. It's crazy.
It's interesting. Sorry, go on.
Sorry, pitch.
Oh, pitch. Sorry. Underwater hockey is an interesting one because you wouldn't have thought there's a lot of people doing it, but I've been to the world tournaments and things like that, and they're all in Sheffield over here because we Brits somehow invented it, and it is busy, man. A lot of people get straight into it. But I play for my team, Halifax, UK Halifax, the real Halifax. And it's incredibly diverse in terms of, I'm like one of the youngest people on the team and I'm 31. Our oldest player is 80. I think there's something to be said for the fact that it's not.
He can hold his breath that long. That's impressive.
Dude, I used to be one of those people that go on a night out and I might have the odd smoke, like one or two or something like that. And the first time I played, I thought I was going to die. And then 4 weeks later, I got like a medical done, and they said my lung efficiency was 115%. Because I just sort of conditioned myself to go down and hold my breath for ages. But yeah, no, I just thought I might run it past you as a hockey fan.
Yeah. Yeah, one night, because we're still obviously in this for a few more months, it looks like. I'm going to go down a rabbit hole of watching a lot of underwater hockey. So I'll let you know about that. But
dude,
it's
about that.
fascinating.
Yeah, man. I'm just saying it's there's no age restriction. It's one of the get stuck in, mate. It's going to be all right, laugh.
I had a couple. Yeah, I have a couple friends over every once in a while here because we're trying to be responsible. But we did a bandy night, and they'd never heard of it before either. We spent like 3 hours going down the bandy rabbit holes. It's pretty funny. So we'll do an underwater hockey rabbit hole then.
Yeah. I think the technology's getting there now that people are strapping the cameras to their head, whereas before the ones that I showed you were like just as professional as you get, like as far as commentating gets and things like that. But now people are like, you can see like the stick. Yeah, it's a stick. It's not bad. Yeah. And the puck and all that stuff. It's really interesting. Anyway, I've taken up way too much of your time because I just wanted to go.
No worries, man. By the way, hopefully you didn't hear a lot of that background noise.
Oh, it's fine.
This is all of a sudden doing some work next door.
It's cool, man. It's very loosey goosey in terms of formatting and things like that. Yeah. All right, man. I'll see you at the world.